Hi, my name is Mike Bachman, and I'm a United Methodist pastor, and I'm excited that we're able to share in a little question and answer time with Imam Omar Suleiman. He's here to answer questions from some folks who have been part of our audience as we've been having an extended conversation together. So I'll introduce them each, and I'm looking forward to hearing their questions and the response that Imam Omar has. So now we have Nikita, who is here to ask some questions, and she's ready with notes and everything to make sure that she gets those questions well.
Yes, thank you for having me. On behalf of my colleague that had to step out, I did want to make sure that her thoughts and questions were acknowledged here. So I'm going to read it word for word here. How do we change the general public's opinion of women's treatment in Islam and show that it's actually complementary, not contradictory to how many women of other faith traditions feel? I know we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but I think the biggest thing that she would like you to address is how are we going to help change the public opinion?
So I think that Muslim women just continuing to be visible and continuing to be successful, that's the greatest statement of empowerment that could possibly exist there. No matter what I say about it, no matter how much we debate or discuss it, right? It's at the end of the day, you have to see those thriving, successful Muslim women, and there are plenty of examples, as we've already mentioned, right, that are out there that are doing great things, both in the worldly sense and also at the same time living out their faith very proudly. So I think that we have to, there's the theological level of this, there's the intellectual, the academic level. So obviously in academia we could debate topics of women's empowerment, and even there's a lot out there. What constitutes feminism? That's everyone's definition of feminism is very different, yes. Right? So what constitutes feminism? That's still yet to be determined, and it will never be determined, right? It will always be a debate. So certainly what we can see is that there are Muslim women that feel empowered by their faith as opposed to being restricted by their faith, and there are many of them, and they are the majority in this country in particular.
If I can offer just another sign of hope from the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. Not that long ago, David Cameron made a statement, the Prime Minister, something along the lines of, the kind of traditional submissive Muslim woman or something like that was a reference in a speech or in a conversation. And it launched a large number of Muslim British women posting pictures of themselves with their degrees, or making reference to the books that they've written, right, or whatever their accomplishments were, and there was a hashtag that was associated with it that was like typical Muslim woman or something like that, to help change that. And I just thought that was a great example of how we can respond when
Sure.
someone makes a comment like that, when a public official reinforces a stereotype. That there's an impetus on all of us to try to speak out in creative ways. And the internet, for better or for worse, affords us the opportunity to make positive change in that. If Sure. the detractors are using it, we ought to be too.
Sure. Okay. Absolutely. Another question here, and I'll segue in from the internet there with your question. Surely I could have just Googled this, but okay. I'm fully confident that you're a well-studied man so that you might be able to give me better understanding. And as a woman of faith and follower of Christ, I think that this is an important conversation that we have, and to debunk myths and rid the world of ignorance, one question and answer at a time. So with that being said, how is it that of the Muslim faith, and I heard you reference, and when you spoke of Jesus and said peace be upon him, mm-hmm. that he can be simply, and I use that word very loosely, a prophet, when a prophet is supposed to be someone who speaks on behalf of God, but Jesus acknowledges and speaks that he is the I am.
Okay. So I think that a study of early Christianity will show that Christianity was anything but monolithic in the first few centuries, right? There were many different movements that arose, and Jesus, peace be upon him, was viewed in many different ways. So for example, you have the early Jewish Christians, if you study about the early Jewish Christians that believe that they still had to abide by, and I have a pastor here, so I'm gonna let you correct me if you feel like I'm saying anything that's wrong or incorrect. But there were Jewish Christians that saw Jesus, peace be upon him, as part of that line of Jewish prophets are calling to the law of Moses, confirming the law of Moses. So the law of Moses, peace be upon him, was still relevant, and so on and so forth. There were questions. If you study the adoptionist movement, the Gnostic Bibles, there were people early on in Christianity, in fact, even in Jerusalem, that debated Christ's divinity, peace be upon him, and whether he was God, whether he was the Son of God, whether the Son of Man. These debates did take place where the Gospels were actually not standardized until 6th century, right? About the 6th century, the Gospels started.
4th century.
Around the 4th century. So the debate about the nature of Jesus, peace be upon him, is a very early debate. As Muslims, we view him, and this is with full love and respect to our Christian brothers and sisters, to keep that in mind. It's a healthy debate, right? We are, after all, the only other religion in the world that holds Christ, peace be upon him, in any esteem. As Muslims, we view him as a messenger of God, as a prophet of God, as one of the greatest messengers and prophets who came to confirm the law of Moses and abrogated only some of those laws, and who's in a line of messengers and prophets. So even the Messiah, we do believe he's the Messiah. So Muhammad, peace be upon him, didn't teach that he would come back to the world to reform it. He actually taught that Jesus, peace be upon him, would return and would establish justice in the world once again. So we believe in a second coming of Christ. But certainly, again, the Gospels were standardized after Christ, and we do hold him in high esteem, but we do see him as a continuation of that line of prophets and messengers, and not as a son of God, not in the begotten sense. So the way that we see it is, and it was called the adoptionist movement, right? The Nestorian Church and so on and so forth. We believe that when God, even in biblical rhetoric, so when it says the Son of God, God references the children of Israel, for example, in the Bible collectively as the Son of God. Other prophets are referenced as sons of God. So we don't believe it to be anything more than metaphorical in that sense, as opposed to something which is literal. So we do hold those differences, but we are the only other faith in the world that holds Jesus, peace be upon him, in any esteem.
Yeah, and that is a place of, it is a place where we hold different beliefs as Muslims and Christians, and there was a lot of diversity of opinion of who Jesus was for several hundred years, but eventually kind of the majority pulled out the kind of the official statement that does believe in the divinity of Christ that came out in the 4th century. But it is fair to acknowledge that there was a diversity of opinion on that across the early church. But we understand Jesus as a figure in our religious lives differently.
Absolutely.
And
what I would say is that, certainly there is a difference of opinion as to who he was. But once again, the two largest religions in the world hold Jesus, peace be upon him, in a very high esteem. And that's something to acknowledge as well, that the similarities are more than the differences. However, to us, our view of God is more in accordance with the Judaic tradition, right? Of who God was and so on and so forth. So the concept of salvation and so on and so forth, all of that is more in accordance with the Jewish tradition and things of that sort. So we believe that Jesus, peace be upon him, was in the line of those messengers and prophets. And we see ourselves as an extension of some of those early Christian groups, if you will, that had those differences as to who Jesus, peace be upon him, was and things of that sort. Is that fair, Pastor?
Yeah.
You good with that?
I'm good with that.
All right.
Thank
I don't
you.
have to do anything to your cookies, right?
No, we're good.
And I'm gonna get out of the way here soon, but
Sure. No, not too.
just for further clarification for myself, in his own admission, Jesus said that he was I am. It's not really about the perception or other thoughts.
Is there any written document from Jesus, peace be upon him, or anything that was written directly from him saying that? Or are they all accounts after his departure?
Speaking that I am, I would be more than happy to look that up for you.
But there's so the Gospels were written after
Right.
Jesus' time, right? And so, again,
Right.
Muslims would say that that he never claimed that. That's something that's debatable, right?
Okay,
There's
well,
nothing
that's understood. That's
right.
basically, I guess, my question is that there. Yeah, okay. Right. Thank you for answering that, and I would love to further that conversation just so I have a better understanding for myself. Sure. Finally, about I don't understand what extra, I guess you can say, the purpose of having 72 wives or virgins in heaven. Where does that come from?
Okay. And
what extra good thing is that to have awaiting you? If
okay,
I'm sorry.
No.
I guess I have a lack of understanding.
No, you need to. It's good that you bring that question forward. The number 72 and these types of things. These are all things that are. None of this is actually traced authentically within the tradition. Actually, the number 70 and 7, even in the Arabic language, the number 70 means kathra, which means quantity. It means many. But there's nothing in Islam, there is no actual authentic narration to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, about a man dying and getting his 72 virgins. Okay. There is a concept of spouses in paradise, heavenly spouses in paradise, and a multitude of heavenly spouses in paradise. The way that we answer that question is that paradise in Islam is what you want it to be. It's exactly what you want it to be. There is nothing that's prohibited in Islam. Now realize that, especially the context, right, that this was in a time where the world was by and large polygamous, okay, when the Quran was revealed and things of that sort. That's not to say that since the world has moved away from that paradise is no longer polygamous, right? Paradise is what you want it to be to us. So if I've had women come up to me and say that if I've got to be with my husband, I don't want to go. So I'm like,
those
don't
people
worry,
who rename anonymous.
I've had those funerals too.
You've had those too, huh? So for men and for women, paradise is what you want it to be in Islam. So there isn't this like set once you go to paradise, it's 72. And it's sort of passed off in a very derogatory manner in a lot of these conversations, like, oh, we're going to send him to his 72 virgins. It doesn't work that way. It's paradise is where you go when you've pleased God, when you've lived your life in accordance with his teachings and so on and so forth. And if you get there, and when you get there, it's what you want it to be.
Thank you so much.
I think I would just like to thank you, Nikita, for asking difficult questions, and for also acknowledging that place of disconnect between Islam and Christianity about the figure of Christ, and there are other theological disconnects that we have, and that's why we're not the same religion, right? But we might still be chasing the same God, and finding ways to walk in respect with each other. And it's difficult when we start pushing for what is the truth, and that's an increasingly difficult thing in our world. But I appreciate the question, the desire for understanding. We need to ask those hard theological questions of one another in order to get to that place. So I really
thank you for your questions. I appreciate it. Yeah. Thank you.